The world tilted when I saw his name on my phone. A single text that burned through years of silence. Can you help me paint my room? My heart thudded. A traitor to the calm I'd built since high school. Since the day I walked away from Caleb Harper without a word. Now, in the fading light of a Pennsylvania summer, I stood outside his old house, wondering why I'd said yes. I knocked, the sound sharp against the quiet street. Caleb opened the door, and time unraveled. He was taller, broader, his dark hair still a mess. But those brown eyes, God, they hadn't changed. They held the same warmth, the same flicker of something unspoken that used to make my chest ache. "Elliot," he said, voice low, like he was testing the weight of my name. "You came. Couldn't leave you to ruin a perfectly good wall," I joked, stepping inside. The house smelled of cedar and memory. Every corner whispering of the summers we'd spent here as kid best friends. Inseparable. Until I realized my feelings for him were more than I could carry. I'd left for college in Boston, cut contact, and buried it all. Now, at 23, I was back, holding a paint roller like a shield. Caleb led me to his bedroom, the one we'd once filled with laughter and secrets. The walls were bare, the posters gone, replaced by cans of pale blue paint and drop cloths. "Mom's selling the place," he said, tossing me a roller. "Figured I'd fix it up first." His voice was casual, but his glance lingered, searching. I wondered if he knew why I'd run. We painted in silence at first, the rhythmic swish of rollers filling the space. Sunlight spilled through the window, catching the dust motes dancing between us. I stole glances at him, his sleeves rolled up, a streak of paint on his cheek. He looked like the boy I'd loved, but different, like he'd carried his own weight these years. "You're quiet," he said suddenly, not looking at me. "You used to talk my ear off." I laughed, but it was brittle. Guess I grew up. Truth was, I was terrified. Being here, so close, stirred something I tried to kill. I focused on the wall, painting in steady strokes. But my pulse raced. What was I doing here? Helping an old friend? Or chasing a ghost? Then he spoke again. Softer. "Why'd you leave, Elle?" The question hit like a punch. My roller stopped mid-stroke, paint dripping onto the cloth below. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. How do you tell someone you left because loving them hurt too much? Because in a town like ours, where whispers turn to judgment, I couldn't face what it meant to want him. Before I could answer, he set his roller down and crossed the room. The door clicked shut behind him, and my breath caught. "Caleb," I started, but he was closer now, close enough to see the freckles across his nose, the way his jaw tightened. "I need to know," he said, voice raw, "because I've been carrying it for years." My heart was a drum, loud and unsteady. I wanted to run again, to hide from the truth clawing its way up. But then he did something I didn't expect. He reached out, his hand brushing mine, and the world stopped. His touch was tentative, like he was afraid I'd vanish. "I missed you," he whispered, and the words broke me open. The paint roller trembled in my hand as I stood frozen, Caleb's fingers still grazing mine. The room felt smaller, the air thick with everything we hadn't said. I wanted to pull away, to keep the walls I'd built. But his eyes held me, searching for answers I wasn't ready to give. "I missed you too," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. It was the truth, raw and jagged, and it hurt to say. I'd spent years convincing myself I'd moved on, that college and new friends had erased him. But standing here, in the room where we'd once planned our futures, I knew I'd been lying to myself. Caleb stepped back, running a hand through his hair. You didn't call. Didn't text. Just gone. His voice cracked, and guilt twisted in my gut. I'd thought leaving was easier for both of us. I'd thought he'd never feel the same, that he'd laugh, or worse, turn away if he knew. But now, with the door closed and the world shut out, I wasn't so sure. I couldn't stay, I said, setting the roller down. It wasn't about you. A lie. And he knew it. His eyes narrowed, but he didn't push. Instead, he picked up a paint can, his movements sharp, like he was trying to shake off the moment. Let's just paint, he said, but the hurt lingered in his tone. We worked side by side, the silence heavier now. I wanted to tell him everything, how I'd fallen for him at 16, how I'd watched him date girls and smiled through the ache, how I'd left because staying meant risking my heart in a town that didn't understand. But the words stayed locked inside, too big for this small room. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the floor, Caleb spoke again. I'm moving to Seattle, he said, not looking at me. Got a job offer. This is my last week here. My stomach dropped. He was leaving, and I'd only just come back. The thought of losing him again felt like a theft. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked, my voice sharper than I meant. He turned. Paint roller paused. Didn't think you cared, he said simply, and that cut deeper than anything. I cared too much, that was the problem. The rest of the evening blurred paint. Small talk. The weight of his words. When I left, the night air was cool against my skin, but inside, I was burning. I walked home, replaying his touch, his confession. I'd come to paint a room, but Caleb had cracked open something I couldn't close again. And as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I knew I couldn't let him leave without telling him the truth. The next morning, I woke with a knot in my chest. Caleb's words looping in my head. I'm moving to Seattle. I'd spent the night wrestling with what to do, torn between fear and the pull of something stronger. By the time I reached his house again, paint cans waiting, I'd made up my Mindy had to tell him. He greeted me with a half smile, but his eyes were guarded, like he'd built his own walls overnight. Ready for round 2? He asked, handing me a roller. I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying his touch, the way his voice had softened when he said he missed me. We painted in silence, the room slowly turning blue, but the air between us crackled with unspoken questions. Halfway through, he broke the quiet. You ever think about what could have been? He asked, his voice casual, but his eyes fixed on the wall. My heart stuttered. All the time, I admitted. Too honest. Too fast. He glanced at me, surprised. And for a moment, I thought he'd say more. But he just nodded and kept painting. The day wore on, and with every stroke, I felt the weight of my silence. I wanted to tell him I'd loved him for years, that I'd left because I couldn't bear the thought of him rejecting me. But every time I opened my mouth, fear clamped it shut. What if he didn't feel the same? What if I ruined everything? Then, as we finished a wall, he dropped his roller and turned to me. Elliot, I can't do this. My stomach plummeted, thinking he meant us. This fragile thing we were rebuilding. But he stepped closer, his voice low and urgent. I can't keep pretending I don't care. I need to know why you left. And don't give me some bullshit excuse. I froze, the roller slipping from my hand. The room felt too small, His presence too big. Caleb. I started. But the words tangled. He waited, his eyes searching mine. And I saw it then, the same fear. The same longing I'd carried for years. It gave me courage. I left because I was in love with you, I said, my voice shaking. And I didn't think you could ever feel the same. The silence that followed was deafening. Caleb's face was unreadable, his eyes wide. And for a moment, I thought I'd made a mistake. Then he laughed. A short, disbelieving sound. You idiot, he said, stepping closer. You think I didn't feel it too? My breath caught as he reached for my hand again. This time deliberate, his fingers lacing through mine. I was scared too, he whispered. But I never stopped wanting you. The world spun. I'd spent years running from this. And now here he was, pulling me closer. Before I could process it, he leaned in, his lips brushing mine, tentative at first, then deeper, like he'd been holding back as long as I had. The kiss was everything, years of longing, fear, and hope colliding in a single moment. When we pulled apart, breathless, I saw the paint on his cheek, the flush on his face. What now? I asked, my voice barely steady. He smiled, a real one this time, and squeezed my hand. We figure it out, he said, together. But as we went back to painting, reality crept in. He was leaving in a week. I had a life in Boston, a job, a world I'd built to keep him out. And this town, our town, wasn't kind to people like us. I saw it in the way people stared, the whispers at church, the way my own parents had reacted when I came out to them last year. They'd said they loved me, but their silence since told another story. That night, as we sat on his porch, sharing a beer, I voiced the fear gnawing at me. What happens when you leave? I asked. Caleb looked at the stars, his shoulder brushing mine. Come with me, he said, like it was the simplest thing in the world. My heart leapt, but doubt followed. Could I uproot my life? Could we make this work in a world that didn't always want us to? Caleb's words hung in the air, come with me. They were a lifeline and a risk, a dream I'd never dared to imagine. But as we sat on his porch, the night wrapping around us, I felt the weight of what he was asking. I can't just leave, I said, my voice quieter than I meant. I have a job, an apartment, a life. Caleb turned to me, his eyes catching the porch light. Is it a life you love? He asked, and I didn't have an answer. Boston was safe, predictable, but it wasn't home. Not like this, not like him. We didn't talk about it again that night, but the question followed me home. I lay awake, picturing Seattle, a city where we could be together without the weight of small-town eyes. But it wasn't just about leaving. It was about facing who I was, who we could be. I'd spent so long hiding. I wasn't sure I knew how to live openly. The next day, painting again. Caleb was different, lighter. Like our kiss had unlocked something in him. He teased me about my terrible brushwork, flicked paint at me, and laughed when I retaliated. For a moment, it was like we were kids again, before feelings complicated everything. But when we took a break, sitting on the floor with paint-splattered clothes, he grew serious. I came out last year, he said, picking at a paint can label. To my mom, my friends. It wasn't easy. I stared at him, stunned. He'd done what I couldn't. Faced the town I'd run from. How'd they take it? I asked. He shrugged, a half smile on his face. Mom cried, but she's trying. Some friends walked away. Others stayed. He looked at me. I wish you'd been there. Guilt hit me again. But so did admiration. He'd been braver than me. And it made me want to be brave too. I'm here now, I said. And he reached for my hand, his touch steadying me. We didn't kiss again, but the air between us hummed with possibility. That afternoon, trouble found us. We were carrying paint cans to the garage when a truck slowed by the house. I recognized the driver, Tommy Reed, a guy from high school who'd always had a mean streak. Well, look at this, he called out, leaning out the window. Harper and his boyfriend, playing house. The word was a slur in his mouth, and my stomach twisted. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. Go home, Tommy, he said, voice calm but firm. Tommy laughed, spitting out another insult before driving off. I stood there, frozen, the old fear clawing at me. Caleb turned to me, his expression soft. You okay? He asked. I nodded, but I wasn't. I'd faced this before, whispers, stares, but with Caleb, it felt different. It felt like something worth fighting for. That night, I told him about my own coming out, how my parents had asked me to keep it quiet, how I'd felt like a stranger in my own home. Caleb listened, his hand on mine, and when I finished, he pulled me into a hug. You're not alone anymore, he said, and I believed him. But as we painted the next day, doubt crept back. Seattle was a dream, but dreams break. What if we couldn't make it work? What if the world outside this room was too much? Caleb seemed to sense it, because he stopped painting and looked at me. I'm not letting you go again, he said, and the conviction in his voice made my heart ache. I wanted to believe him, but fear is a stubborn thing. The room was nearly done, the pale blue walls a quiet testament to the days we'd spent together. But with every finished section, the clock ticked louder. Caleb's move to Seattle loomed, and I still hadn't answered his question. Come with me. It was a simple idea, but it carried the weight of 1,000 choices. We were cleaning brushes in the backyard, the summer heat pressing down, when Caleb brought it up again. Have you thought about it? He asked, scrubbing paint from his hands. I avoided his eyes, focusing on the water running red with paint. It's not that simple, I said. I'd be starting over. No job, no plan. He dried his hands, stepping closer. You'd have me, he said, and the words were a spark in the dark. I wanted to say yes, to throw caution to the wind, but fear held me back. I'd built a life in Boston to avoid risk, to avoid pain. Could I tear it down for him? For us? Caleb didn't push, but I saw the hope in his eyes, and it made me ache. We went back to painting, but the question lingered, heavy as the humid air. That evening, we took a break at the local diner, a place we'd haunted as kids. The fluorescent lights buzzed, and the smell of coffee and grease filled the air. We sat in a corner booth, sharing fries, and for a moment, it felt like nothing had changed. But then a group of guys walked in, Tommy Reed and his friends. Their eyes landed on us, and I felt Caleb tense beside me. Harper, Tommy called, his voice loud enough to turn heads. Didn't know you were still here. Thought you'd run off with your boyfriend by now. The diner went quiet, and my face burned. I wanted to shrink, to disappear, but Caleb didn't. He leaned back, meeting Tommy's gaze. Jealous, Reed, he said, his tone light but sharp. The guys laughed, but it was forced, and they moved on. I looked at Caleb, amazed. How do you do that? I asked. He shrugged, dipping a fry in ketchup. I decided a long time ago I'm done hiding. He said, life's too short. His words hit hard. I'd been hiding for years. From him. From myself. From the world. Maybe it was time to stop. Back at the house. We finished the last wall. The room was complete. But I felt unfinished. As we stood back to admire our work, Caleb turned to me. I'm leaving in 3 days. He said, I want you to come. But I need you to want it too. His voice was steady. But his eyes were vulnerable. And I knew this was my chance to choose. I didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, I helped him clean up, our hands brushing as we stacked paint cans. Every touch was a reminder of what I could lose. That night, alone in my apartment, I made a list, pros and cons. Practical things like jobs and rent. But in the end, it wasn't about logic. It was about Caleb. About the life we could have if I was brave enough to try. 3 days. That's all I had to decide. I stood in Caleb's room, now fully painted, the blue walls glowing in the morning light. It looked new, like a fresh start. But I felt stuck, caught between fear and hope. Caleb was packing boxes, his movements quick and purposeful. You're quiet again, he said, taping a box shut. I forced a smile, picking up a stack of books to help. Just thinking, I said. He paused, looking at me. About Seattle. I nodded, and he set the tape down, crossing the room. Talk to me. L. I took a breath, the words spilling out. What if it doesn't work? What if we move and it falls apart? Or what if people like Tommy are everywhere? Caleb's face softened, and he took my hands. There'll always be people like Tommy, he said. But there'll also be people who don't care, who'll see us for us. And as for falling apart, he squeezed my hands. I'm not going anywhere unless you tell me to. His words were an anchor, grounding me. But doubt still gnawed. I'd never taken a risk this big. Never bet on something as fragile as love. We spent the day packing, talking about Seattle, his job, the apartment he'd found, the life he wanted. With every word, I saw it more clearly, a future where we could be together. Not hiding, not running. That afternoon, we took a walk through town, passing the park where we'd played as kids. Caleb pointed out the tree we'd carved our initials in, now grown taller. The letters faded, but still there. We were always us, he said, his voice soft. Even when you left, I knew you'd come back. I wanted to cry, to tell him how much I'd missed him. But instead, I kissed him, right there in the open, not caring who saw. The moment was broken by a shout. Fags. The word cut through the air, and I turned to see a group of kids, teenagers, probably laughing as they ran off. Caleb's hand tightened on mine, but he didn't let go. They're just kids, he said, but his voice was tight. I felt the old fear rise. But this time, I pushed it down. I wasn't running anymore. That night, we sat on his bed, the room empty except for a few boxes. I'm scared, I admitted, my voice barely audible. Caleb pulled me close, his arms strong around me. Me too, he said. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you. His words broke something in me, and I kissed him, long and slow, letting myself believe we could do this. By morning, I'd made my decision. I called my boss, quit my job, and started looking for work in Seattle. It was reckless, terrifying, but it felt right. Caleb grinned when I told him, pulling me into a hug that felt like home. "We're doing this," he said, and I nodded, my heart full. The day before Caleb's move, the house felt hollow, like it was already letting go of him. We spent the morning loading boxes into his truck, the summer heat making us sweat through our shirts. Every box felt like a step toward something new, but also a goodbye to the life we'd known. As we worked, his mom stopped by, her eyes red from crying. She hugged Caleb, then me, her voice soft. "Take care of each other," she said, and I saw the effort it took her to accept us. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start, and it gave me hope. We promised to visit, to call, and she left with a smile that felt like a blessing. That afternoon, we took a break at the lake, a place we'd gone as kids. The water was still, reflecting the sky, and we sat on the dock, our feet dangling. "You sure about this?" Caleb asked, his voice quiet. I looked at him, his face golden in the sunlight, and nodded. "I've never been sure," I said, and I meant it. But doubt crept in again that night, as we lay in his empty room, the air mattress creaking beneath us. "What if we're not enough?" I whispered, the dark making me brave. Caleb turned to me, his hand finding mine. "We are," he said. "We've always been." He kissed me, and for the first time, I let myself believe it. The next morning, we hit the road. The drive to Seattle was long, days blurring together, gas stations, diners, endless highways. We talked, laughed, argued over music. Caleb sang off-key to old rock songs, and I teased him, my heart lighter than it had been in years. But at night, in cheap motels, fear whispered again. What if Seattle wasn't the answer? What if we couldn't outrun the world's judgment? When we reached the city, it was overwhelming: tall buildings, crowded streets, a world so different from our small town. Caleb's apartment was small, bare, but ours. We unpacked, painted the walls a soft gray, and made it home. The first night, we sat on the floor, eating takeout, and I felt something new: freedom. But freedom came with challenges. I struggled to find a job, and Caleb's new role kept him busy. We argued sometimes, small things that felt bigger in the stress of starting over. Yet every night, we came back to each other, his arms around me, his voice in my ear. "We're okay," he'd say, and I'd believe him. Seattle was a new world, vibrant and loud, but it wasn't always kind. I found a job at a coffee shop, the pay barely enough to cover my share of rent. Caleb's engineering job kept him late, and some nights, I'd sit alone in our apartment, wondering if I'd made the right choice. But then he'd come home, his smile tired but warm, and pull me into his arms, and I'd remember why I was here. We built a life, piece by piece. We found a favorite diner, a park where we'd walk on Sundays, a bar where nobody cared who we were. But the past followed us. One night, at that bar, a drunk guy made a comment, his words sharp and familiar. Caleb stood up, his voice steady. "We're just trying to have a drink," he said, and the guy backed off. I saw the fire in Caleb's eyes, the same strength he'd shown back home, and I loved him more for it. But love wasn't enough to erase the world. My parents called, their voices strained, asking when I'd come to my senses. I hung up, my chest tight, and Caleb held me, his silence saying more than words. We were enough, I told myself. But some days, it was hard to believe. One evening, Caleb came home with a Surprizia guitar, like the one he'd had in high school. "Play something," I said, and he did, his fingers coaxing out a melody that felt like us. I sang along, off-key, and we laughed until we couldn't breathe. In that moment, I knew we'd made it through the hardest part. But life doesn't stop testing you. A month later, Caleb got a call his mom was sick. We flew back to Pennsylvania, the town feeling smaller, sharper. At the hospital, his mom squeezed my hand, her eyes kind. "I'm proud of you both," she said, and I cried, not just for her, but for everything we'd fought for. Back in Seattle, we settled into a rhythm. I got a better job, teaching at a community center, and Caleb started talking about the Futuria house. Maybe, or a trip somewhere far. We were building something, not just a life, but a legacy of choosing each other. A year later, we stood in our apartment, now filled with books, photos, a life we'd made. Caleb's mom was better, and we'd visited twice, each time easier. The town hadn't changed, but we had. We walked hand in hand, not caring who saw, and the whispers didn't hurt as much. One night, Caleb took me to the roof, the city sparkling below. He was nervous, fidgeting, and I laughed, thinking he was planning a prank. But then he pulled out a ring, simple and silver, and my heart stopped. "Elliot," he said, his voice shaking, "I've loved you since we were kids. Marry me." I stared at him, the boy I'd run from, the man I'd chosen. Tears came, and I nodded, unable to speak. He slid the ring on my finger, and we kissed, the city a witness to our promise. It wasn't legal yet, not everywhere, but it was ours, and that was enough. We married in a small ceremony, just friends, his mom, a few cousins who'd come around. The room was painted blue, like the one we'd started in, a nod to where it began. I looked at Caleb, his eyes bright, and knew we'd fought for this against fear, against judgment, against the world. Life wasn't perfect. We still argued, still faced the occasional sneer. But we had each other, and that was the victory. Love wasn't just a feeling. It was a choice, a fight, a promise to keep showing up. And as we stood in our blue room, hand in hand, I knew we'd keep choosing it. Every day, for the rest of our lives.